Jealousy is louder than love. And love makes you bigger, not smaller. Don't shrink yourself for this man or any other one. This is Bedtime Stories, Grown-Up Edition. Short story, The Perfect Storm, Part 4. When we left off, Sincere and Saint had learned all they could about the notorious 5 families, about the heads of each family, past and present, and about what those heads valued. When Sincere learned about Stanley's conception, birth, life, and death, he had a tough question for Manny. He'd asked if life would have been easier if Nadia would have aborted Stanley, and Manny had answered unequivocally no. When Sincere pressed the men about their constant references to God, Manny had explained that 2 things can be true at the same time. They could be stone cold killers and know that there is a God. And when that conversation was over, Sincere had second thoughts about having Janelle knocked off. He didn't know how he was going to work it out, how he was going to deal with her for 18 years plus some. And he definitely didn't know how in the world he was going to tell Natalia. It was difficult enough to tell her that not only had he been seeing other women, which she had no issue with and expected, but he'd still been sleeping with them after agreeing to abstain. He was pleasantly surprised when she didn't flip out or cut him off, and he did not want to have to double back and tell her that he had gotten somebody knocked up in the process. He was just hoping that Catherine hadn't pulled that trigger after their last conversation about it several days before, when he approached her and said, "So listen, right? The thing is," Catherine said, "let me guess, you've had a change of heart." Sincere said, "Yeah, I don't know how I'm gonna work all this out," but Catherine said, "I don't know either. It's a good thing I didn't have a girl knocked off. I had her snatched and put on ice. That way you would have time to rethink your haphazard decision." Sincere said, "Yo, you the best." Catherine said, "I know. Son, you're gonna have to learn not to make decisions based on knee-jerk reactions. Take time to consider all the variables. Now let's get to work." It was time for them to put the plan that they'd been working on for days in play. The kidnappers had finally gotten Sincere's contact information out of Chantal. They'd made contact, made demands, and Sincere was going to allow them to believe that he was so desperate to get his sisters back that he was actually fool enough to risk his own life and safety to meet them someplace with a payoff. And Saint was going to do what he did best: head to the meetup spot in advance of the meeting, scope the scene, set traps, secure visuals, take out anybody who might pose a risk to the plan, and ensure that when the meeting was over, every single soldier assigned by the opposing criminal organization to take out the St. James soldiers and kidnap Sincere were taken out or captured. At the same time, there'd be a coordinated effort of teams of 5 family soldiers moving in on the organizations, stash spots, homes, safe houses, and businesses. And of course, they'd be rescuing Simone and Star. At the same time, Natalia and her sister Courtney had had their massages and were relaxing in the jacuzzi, sipping on cocktails and chatting. Courtney had told Natalia all about the men that she was dating and about the fun behind man that she'd met since she'd gotten to Miami. She said, "Caramel complected, a little over 6 feet tall, and he had the most beautiful hazel eyes rimmed in green. And girl, he was a gentleman. When I entered the room, he stood up and gave me his seat, listened while I talked, gave me direct eye contact. When I shot my shot, he shot me down. And he was smooth with it. And I couldn't do nothing but take that. It's been a long time since I've been turned down. But what am I gonna do with a man checking for another woman?" Natalia said, "Did the man say he had a woman, or was he just telling you he wasn't interested in you?" Courtney said, "I highly doubt that. Everybody's interested in me, including your boy Sincere." Natalia said, "All right now, I've had enough. You keep making these snide comments. You're gonna have to tell me what's up." Courtney said, "All I can do is reiterate what I've already told you. He is not the one. Didn't you say you had another prospect? You haven't told me anything about him." And then Natalia told her sister all about her 5th and final prospect. She said, "It's so crazy because they are night and day. And to be honest, he's kind of more my speed, at least personality-wise. And we got a lot in common. Plus, he has this allure to him that I just can't explain. And you know, I have sworn off men who are really in the thick of things, but I think I could make an exception for him." Courtney said, "You know what? We should do what we used to do back in the day." Natalia said, "Oh, Lord." Courtney said, "No, seriously. It worked then. It'll probably work now." Natalia said, "I've already checked him out. He's on the up and up. That's all I need to know." Courtney said, "So you don't want to know whether he'd go for your big sister?" When the sisters were younger, they'd made a game of trying the men who were pursuing one or the other of them. This wasn't something that they started on a whim. They'd actually had multiple occasions when one of them was dating a guy, and when the opportunity presented itself, he'd pushed up on her sister. After multiple experiences like that, Courtney and Natalia had agreed that before introductions were made, if they both didn't already know the guy. The sister who wasn't dating him would accidentally on purpose run into him, subtly drop some bait, and then see if he latched on. If he did, the sister who was dating him would drop him like a bad habit. And if he didn't, all steams would be go. More than one man had fallen for the bait. And while Natalia had outgrown the game, Courtney had not. She still asked her sister to drop bait. And while it hadn't worked in a while, she was not ready to abandon old habits. Natalia said, "Nah, I'm good. But I do want you to meet Sincere. When I go to the St. James estate tomorrow, you should go with me." Courtney said, "I'm not going to be able to do that. I have other plans, and then I'm heading out." Natalia said, "You don't want to see mommy before you go?" Courtney said, "I had time with her before you got here." Natalia said, "Oh, really? And why were you here before I got here, if you were meeting me here?" Natalia suspected that her sister, who was employed by the Lopez organization, was more than just the head of their planning and development. Her sister had an uncanny ability of showing up at the right time with a good story, getting missing, and then blowing back out of town. And while Natalia had made it a point not to question her sister about what she really did for the Lopez organization, the goings-on during her second date with Sincere had forced her to question her sister. And her sister was 10 toes. She refused to confirm or deny whether she was the covert operative that the 5 families had sent in to pretend to be Natalia when her date with Sincere ended. The covert's job was to be seen with Sincere, tailed from the restaurant where they had met, allowing Natalia to leave without being seen or tracked, and to end the operation that included trying to find out who the woman was that Sincere was dating. They'd spotted her after their first date a few days before at the ice cream parlor. They'd attempted to follow her that day, but they'd been intercepted by Natalia's security. What Natalia did not know was that the covert operative had been tracked by the criminal organization. She'd led them to a safe house where they were ambushed, and that ended the tracking of Sincere's date. They'd been unable to identify Natalia, but Bruce's shenanigans had put her back in play, and that's what necessitated her relocation from Texas to Miami under Sincere and Catherine's protection. So Courtney said, "Oh, I was here because I was looking at properties. I'm working on an endeavor that includes purchasing a whole plot of land, the properties on that land, demoing them, and constructing a low-income property that's actually going to be financed by the St. James organization. You could say that I'm on loan from the Lopez's to the St. James's." Natalia said, "I bet. And you just happen to be leaving right before I can formally introduce you to Sincere." Courtney said, "I don't need to meet him." "Hell, it sounds like I need to meet the other one." Natalia said, "If he was in Miami, I would introduce you. Hell, the description of that guy you met almost sounded like him, right until you got to the eyes. He has beautiful eyes, but they're just a regular old chocolate brown." Courtney said, "Well, the next time y'all together, FaceTime me then. But as for that damn Sincere, I don't know how many times I could tell you that that man is not the one." Natalia said, "You're going to have to keep telling me until you tell me why." Courtney said, "I shouldn't have to do that. My word should be good enough." Natalia said, "Now when in the hell have I ever let somebody else pick my partners? If I stayed with Bruce all that time, despite the fact that Daddy and everybody else was absolutely sure that it was a bad idea, how would this be any different? Other than the fact that I learned my lesson with Bruce. Please believe me, Sincere is on thin ice. I'm sure his stepmother and my boss will be disappointed if this doesn't turn into happily ever after. But I promise, I'm keeping my options open. And if anything, my other little friend is definitely giving him a run for his money." Courtney said, "And that's why you need to let me try him." Natalia said, "I'll pass." Several hours later, Operation Trifecta had been a success, while Catherine wasn't overseeing the operation because she'd entrusted that to the capable hands of the General Ezra. She was getting constant updates, though, so she knew that once again, Saint had did his big one. Sincere had played the plan to a T. The notorious 5 family teams that had moved in on the opposing organization hadn't had any casualties. And in addition to safely rescuing Simone and Star, they'd also gotten their hands on the man in charge and all of his higher-ups. So while sitting across the dinner table from her house guest, she asked, "Are you ready for introductions tomorrow? Sincere will finally be free and available to you." And Miss Eugenia said, "I think this meeting is well overdue, but you and I probably should talk. I'm not the smile, nod, and shake hands kind of mother. And since God didn't give me sons, I don't know what it's like to have my son raked over the coals by the mother of a girl or woman he's pursuing. So I need you to be prepared, because I'm going to give your son hell." And Catherine just chuckled. She said, "I would expect nothing less. Either he's up for the challenge or he isn't. I didn't raise him. I didn't even have a hand in raising him. And while I financed his lifestyle, I'm behind the 8 ball as it pertains to teaching my stepsons how to navigate the world of women. One of them is still in the nest. The other one already has his wings. Now, that does not make either of them a better prospect than the other? Because they both have their flaws. And they both have some parenting failures that they need to work through. But we both know that that's a part of life. Miss Eugenia said, and it is. But I've taught my daughters that a man's growth, maturity, and healing is his job and not a project for them to complete. If dating my daughter is on-the-job training for your stepson, then he needs to find himself another teacher. Catherine said, and I can't even be mad at you, but how do I put this? If this were a game of tennis, it's mixed doubles. I've served the ball, she's returned my serve, and he is prepared to stick the volley. The only issue is, they're not on the same team. She's got another partner who's a whole lot more skilled. Miss Eugenia said, well, the last time I checked, they aren't in a committed relationship. I'm sure my daughter isn't the only player on his team either. Catherine said, and I'm with you when you're right. The issue is the identity of your daughter's partner. After a lengthy discussion and the conclusion of dinner, Catherine headed to the safe house. She needed to see her stepdaughters, make sure that the plan to address Simone's addiction wasn't being met with opposition from her. She also needed to get a debrief from Star so that she could adequately and accurately provide the heads of the 5 families, the heads in training, and their right hands, a detailed description of the operation. She told Miss Eugenia, I shouldn't be gone long. If you don't mind waiting up for me, I think that it's important that we continue this conversation and come to some kind of understanding before your daughter and my stepson show up tomorrow. And Miss Eugenia said, I concur. While Catherine was gone, Miss Eugenia called her daughter, Natalia. She said, baby girl, is there anything that you want me to know before I meet this young man that you've been dating tomorrow? Natalia said, no, nothing that I can think of. Nothing that I haven't already told you about him. Miss Eugenia said, and what about the other men that you're dating? You haven't cut them all off, have you? Natalia said, no, I have one other prospect. Why? This isn't usually your area of concern. Miss Eugenia said, I know. I trust you to handle your business. And I try not to pry. But you already know that your father and I have some real concerns about you pursuing a relationship with Sincere. And those concerns go far beyond the reputation of his father. I spoke with your daddy, and he told me that that boy is involved with some women who are absolutely not on your level. At least one of those women has a history of violence, and he's been involved with these women for years. I don't know how I feel about you dealing with a man who could waste a woman's time for that long, or a man who is clearly not all that discriminating. It sounds to me like that boy for everybody. And like his daddy, wherever he lay his hat is his home. Not to mention, I had a rather interesting conversation with his stepmother. Natalia said, oh, really? And what did she say? Miss Eugenia said, I have yet to decide whether I want to share that with you. She and I are supposed to pick up where we left off when she comes back from handling some 5 family business. And that's another thing. Are you prepared to pick up where she's going to leave off? Because from the sounds of things, this man is not looking for a woman who has a life of her own. He's looking for a partner in life and business. And Catherine is clearly not a pretty face who was sitting on the sidelines, counting the money, shopping and hosting dinners when her husband was at the helm. Natalia said, I don't know about all that. I just accepted a new opportunity at Vibrantly You. It doesn't start until I get back to town, but I only have a couple more days that I can be off the clock because I'm going to have to start my training as well as start training my replacement. Miss Eugenia said, and Sincere is knowledgeable about that? Natalia said, yeah, I told him. Miss Eugenia said, and how'd he take it? And Natalia got quiet because when she told Sincere about her promotion, all excited, his response was, must be nice. At least somebody's making some headway. Because it's clear that I'm not going to be the head no damn time soon. And that didn't necessarily sit well with Natalia. She certainly did not want to tell her mother about it, because she knew it wouldn't sit well with her either. But she didn't have to say a word, because her silence spoke volumes. Miss Eugenia said, after all them shenanigans with Bruce, I told you to watch a man's energy when you win. What did I say? Natalia said, you said that jealousy is louder than love. Miss Eugenia said, exactly. And I also told you that love makes you bigger, not smaller. Don't shrink yourself for this man or any other one. Are you dating him to make your boss happy? Do you feel like this promotion is connected to... Natalia said, no. I know it's hard to believe, but I actually do like him. He's got some growing to do, but I can see the fruit of his labor. Miss Eugenia said, how so? Natalia said, well, for one, he told me all about the other women he was dating, and he's already ended things with them. Not that I required that. And I didn't have to ask about them. He volunteered it. Miss Eugenia said, of course he did. Because your father called him to the carpet. The man had no other choice. He knows that you and your father are close. And he knows that if he wasn't talking right, your father was going to tell it. Natalia said, well, was he talking right or not? Because clearly daddy told you. Miss Eugenia said, I'm his wife, girl. That man don't poop without telling me about it. I'm going to say this and I'm going to let you go. If the day comes when you got to choose Between these two men you're dating, choose the one who shows up, not the one who shows off. And remember, if a man has to keep asking for forgiveness for the same sins, he ain't changing, baby. He's manipulating. And you already know what happens when a man is intimately involved with a woman for a lengthy period of time and he cuts her off, especially when he does it for another woman. Where there is smoke, there is fire. When Catherine got back to the St. James estate, Miss Eugenia had in fact waited up for her. The sprawling estate had lots of places for anybody and everybody to stay. But because of the ongoing issues with the International Trafficking Organization, Catherine had requested that everybody stay in the main house, guests and family. Now, they had security on top of security, but it would be a whole lot easier for security to manage the goings-on if everybody was sleeping under the same roof. Now, they could still move around the property freely, as long as security was well aware of who was where doing what. When Catherine returned to the property, she wasn't alone, though, and she could not have predicted that. She'd expected that Star would want to stay at the safe house with Simone, and Saint would too, since he was the brother who was more emotionally connected to the three sisters. Catherine was prepared to have to convince Sincere that he should stay at the safe house too. It would take a concerted effort to get Simone through the night without the drugs that she had been being fed. A plane would be flying her out the following morning to rehab. And while the soldiers who were assigned to the safe house would probably not have a problem keeping her right there, they wouldn't be able to provide her with the emotional support that she was going to need to make it through the night without drugs after being fed them for weeks. And she hadn't been fed her drug of choice. Powder withdrawal she could handle, but withdrawal from that white girl wasn't nothing nice. But seeing his sister in a state he'd never seen her in before had done something to Sincere, and he volunteered to stay at the safe house with her. It was clear that he was definitely growing, and he didn't just volunteer to stay with Simone. He insisted that Saint leave. He could see just how badly seeing his sister in that state was hurting Saint, and he knew that his little brother wasn't going to be able to take much more. It took all three of the siblings and Catherine to convince Saint that it was a good idea for him to head back to the house. And while she did not want to introduce Saint to Miss Eugenia, she'd concluded that if it had to happen, she was going to use it. Unfortunately, though, before she had the opportunity to prep Saint for the introduction, she was stopped by one of her lieutenants. And before she could stop Saint from walking into the drawing room, he opened the door and walked right in. And before the lieutenant could finish telling her exactly what was transpiring in said drawing room, the door came back open, Saint walked back out, and in his arms was a struggling to breathe Miss Eugenia. Miss Eugenia had come into contact with something that she was allergic to. She'd taken her prescribed allergy medicine, but before it could fully kick in, it had started affecting her breathing. When Saint walked in, he had no idea who she was. All he knew was there was an older woman struggling to breathe, a soldier trying to talk to her and to somebody on the phone, an action that needed to be taken. Without even finding out what was going on or who the woman was, he'd gone into action. He'd scooped her up, carried her to the nearest room that had a bathroom attached, carried her into the bathroom, closed the door, held her in one arm while he turned the shower on, set it all the way to hot, aimed the shower head at the back wall, and then stepped in while still holding the strange woman in his arms, closed the shower door, and allowed the bathroom to fill with steam. In the bedroom, the soldier who he'd made come with him said, "What you want me to do?" Saint said, "I want you to send somebody to the garden, have them go in the shed, go to the back, look on the left wall, on the third or fourth shelf. All the jars are in alphabetical order. Grab the jar that says milkweed on it. While they're doing that, have somebody else boil some water. It ain't ready till the kettle is whistling. Get a mug, put a teaspoon of honey in it, cut a lemon, squeeze the whole lemon in it. Pour 8 ounces of the boiling water in the cup. Grab a tea infuser. It should be in the drawer closest to the fridge. On the left, fill it with the milkweed. Don't put it in the cup. Bring me the cup and the tea infuser. And make it fast." At the door of the room, Catherine had heard the instructions. She said, "I'll handle the hot water. You get somebody to go get the milkweed." Then she walked out of the room wondering what the hell milkweed was. When she returned to the bathroom with a cup of hot water with honey and lemon in it and the tea infuser, Saint had stepped out of the shower. Miss Eugenia was sitting on the Henry bench, and while she was still struggling to breathe, she was breathing easier. She handed Saint the cup and the tea infuser, and he dropped it in the mug, sat it on the counter, washed his hands, and then used his finger to swirl the tea infuser around in the hot water. He was clearly burning himself, but he said, "It's my bad, because I didn't say to bring a spoon." When the concoction was however it needed to be, he plucked the tea infuser out, handed the hot cup to Miss Eugenia and said, "I know it's hot, but you got to sip it, and you got to get it all down." Before Catherine had initially entered the room, the lieutenant had told her that Miss Eugenia had sent him to her room to get her medicine bag. When he'd returned with it, she dug through it, took out an inhaler, took one puff, and then it ran empty. While he was trying to calm her down, one of the soldiers suggested that they try and have her prescription refilled at a 24-hour pharmacy in Miami. But he said that was a bad idea. Somebody could track that prescription. So instead, he had the soldier call one of the family's doctors. The doctor was on his way with a brand new inhaler, but he was more than 20 minutes away. And it didn't look like Miss Eugenia had 20 minutes. By the time the doctor arrived with the inhaler, Miss Eugenia was perfectly fine. She said, "Young man, what you know about bush medicine?" And Saint said, "Nothing. You can call me a jack of all trades." And Miss Eugenia said, "Well, nobody can ever accuse you of being a master of none." When Saint was in Miami and staying at the St. James estate, one of his favorite pastimes was strolling through the family's garden. Catherine had seen him out there, picking flowers and weeds and berries off trees, and she knew that he spent a great deal of time inside her shed, but she had no idea what he was doing in there. She'd seen him carrying stuff in and out of the shed, and she knew that he'd rearranged it, built shelves, and that there were little jars, alphabetized, sitting on those shelves. She'd assumed that they were tools of his trade, that he wasn't just skilled with firearms, sharps, and explosives, and he was using whatever was in those jars to complete his assignments. She never questioned him about it, but not because she wasn't interested in whatever he was interested in. She didn't want to pry, and she was just glad that he'd finally made himself at home. And when she had the occasion to observe him, it warmed her heart to see him enjoying himself. So she certainly did not know that he'd found things in her garden that could save lives. She was Trinidadian, but she had no experience with bush medicine. And since Saint hadn't been to Trinidad before his father's death, she highly doubted that he'd picked up any of these skills in her motherland. She listened as Saint explained the medicinal properties of milkweed, which included reducing inflammation and dilating the trachea and bronchus, improving one's ability to breathe. And Saint explained all of this while his back was soaked, because in order to get Miss Eugenia as close to the steam from the shower as possible, he had to put his back directly in the shower stream. When he was done, he said, "I'm glad you're feeling better. I need to go clean up." And the doctor walked in to check Miss Eugenia out and give her new inhaler. When the doctor was done, Miss Eugenia looked at Catherine and said, "If that's him, you don't got to worry about me saying a word. The true character of a man is what he does for someone who can't do anything for him in return." "Did he even know who I was before he helped me?" Catherine said, "Nope." And Miss Eugenia said, "Well, to use one of your tennis examples, I guess that's game, set, match." And as Saint headed to his room, he realized exactly where he smelt that scent before. As he'd held Miss Eugenia in the shower, he'd unintentionally gotten a good whiff of her, and she smelled a whole lot like Date Night by Vibrantly You. Saint was entirely too intelligent, too well trained, and too tuned in to not see the writing on the wall. He was getting ready to come face to face with his worst nightmare. He had finally agreed to meet Natalia, and after meeting Christine and holding Miss Eugenia in his arms, he knew everything that he needed to know about Tori and Natalia. He also knew that if he attended that little meetup, his brother was going to lose his ish. So he lit the date night candle that he'd gotten from Tori. He showered, changed, and packed all his stuff. Because as soon as Catherine and Sincere headed to the round table meeting, he was getting the hell out of Dodge.
Give me lemons and I went and spiked the lemonade. Ain't nothing worse than having to live when you don't feel alive. I might be broken a little bit, but bitch, I'm still alive. I know, and I know, and I know, and I know. People change all like the season. And I feel, and I feel, and I feel, and I feel like I'm on my own.